Next up, we've got a lady who was born in Belfast, who studied at Glasgow University, was a cancer specialist and researcher, who spent 2 years with the United Nations in Gaza, the Lebanon, and in Palestine. And probably more than any other individual who has emerged during this campaign, isn't a politician, wasn't a politician before the campaign got going, but has emerged as a public figure. I think, like no one else, has tweaked the nose of the establishment that governs us. It's got under their skin because they know she's right and they know that the truth that she speaks is changing hearts and minds the length and breadth of the country. She's served the public for 18 years at Cross House Hospital in Kilmarnock as a consultant surgeon, and she's taking time out tonight to be with us to tell us the truth about health and the future of the Union. Put your hands together for Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Kevlar vest just makes this jacket so bulky. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invite to speak tonight. I think I've tweaked somebody's nose, because they're definitely out to get me big time now. When I think about what we're going to do next month, it's only about one thing. Now, we talk about the different policies or ideas we have, or what might happen afterwards. And they talk about all the things we should be scared of. But what's going to happen when we go into that booth with our stumpy pencil and put our wee mark on the piece of paper is we're going to decide, are we a region or are we a country? Are we going to keep that control that Michelle was talking about? And that's all this is about. Do we want to be in control? Because Scotland's at a fork in the road. And if we go down one way they're driving, and we just have to accept what we get, and sometimes we'll like it, and an awful lot of the times we won't. Or we kick them out of the driver's seat, and we decide to go down the other road. We've had a lifetime of decisions I don't think Scots would have made. And I call myself a Scot now, and this was a revelation at the Games, that 2 years of this meant I was actually waving the saltire and not even noticing some poor Northern Ireland swimmer, and I was forgetting to cheer for them. So this has, I've always said I'm an adoptive Scot, this is my adoptive home, but somehow being out 4 nights a week, writing things, speaking to people, has turned me into a Scot. So thank you very much. Decisions that I think we wouldn't have made as Scots go right back to wars, from Falklands to Iraq. I don't think we'd have parked weapons of mass destruction right beside our biggest city. I certainly don't think we'd have had the poll tax or the bedroom tax, and I don't think any of us would have zoned the Central Belt for fracking without the slightest conversation, not even a phone call, with our government. And what we've also had in my entire adult life has been the relentless move of public resources into private hands. We saw it when the oil moved from being Brit Oil, where we owned it, to being BP, where they owned it. We saw it with railways, we saw it with the energy companies, and we've seen it with Royal Mail being flogged off for tuppence. Things we built, our tax, people we trained, given over to other people to make money out of. And now it's the turn of the NHS in England. And the reason I spoke out was that back then, when I started speaking about it at the end of February, in wee tiny village halls, was nobody up here seemed to know anything about it at all. You would have thought there was a media blackout on it. Now, okay, it's all over the place now, and they say I'm scaremongering, and now they're saying that I'm lying. But back then, the reason that I spoke out was I felt you need to know about it when you make your decision. What's happened in the last year, since April 2013, is that all new services commissioned in England must be put out to tender between private companies and the NHS, and between one NHS hospital and another NHS hospital. Now, in that first year, 70% of them have gone to private companies like Virgin and Atos. What they do is they cherry pick off the easy stuff. It's nearly all surgery. Someone who needs a new knee or a hernia fix, they're nice and healthy, they come in, they get their operation, they go home, kerching. That's it. But if you're diabetic, they're not interested in you. If you've had a stroke, they're not interested in you. If you have a complex cancer, they're not interested in you. So what's been happening over that year is the NHS is progressively left with treating the more complex and more expensive patients while they cherry pick out all the easy stuff. So at the end of just 1 year, more than 40% of trusts in England are in debt, massive debt. The government had to bail them out with £500 million, and even that wasn't enough. They had actually managed to balance their books the year before the change. Now this has got so drastic, and any of you who work in public service will know what follows an overspend, is cuts in staff and cuts in services. So down south, if you picked up the papers, you'd be reading about the disaster in accident and emergency and long waiting lists and everything's awful and the NHS is falling apart and something must be done. And up here, nothing, not a word. Andy Burnham jumps up and down south and says something must be done, the NHS will be gone in 5 years. I mention it up here in a speech and I'm lying. So I felt people up here needed to know about that. He said, how come they did that when it wasn't in their manifesto? How come they made those changes when it wasn't discussed before the last election? Well, I wanted to make sure we had discussed it before we make the decision next month, because this is something that's important to us. And things have got so bad that think tanks in England are starting to talk about routine charges. Now, they're think tanks. This is not government policy or anything like that. But the public down south are being softened up. It's in The Sun, it's in other newspapers, it's in radio phone-ins. It was in a radio phone-in here on Radio Scotland in the kind of morning call. And people are phoning in and saying, well, I would pay £10 to save the NHS, to go to a GP. I would pay £25 to go to A&E or a GP if that would save the NHS. But I'm sorry, if you're paying to go and see the doctor, you haven't saved the NHS. The NHS is finally finished. The 66-year experiment of free healthcare when you need it would be over. So you agreeing to charges because you're not too badly off, that doesn't defend the NHS. It puts the final nail in the coffin. Now again, they say, oh, this morning against Malcolm Chisholm and Radio Clyde, I'm fantasising and exaggerating. But yet, 50% of NHS leaders in a survey by the Nuffield Trust said that they thought that charges would come in within the next 10 years. All of this was supposedly to increase efficiency and decrease costs. That was the coalition excuse for such radical privatisation and franchising of the NHS in England. But you can look up a thing online called the Commonwealth Fund. Now, it's nothing to do with the games we've just had in Glasgow. This is actually in America. This is a Washington think tank that compares the US health system with other health systems every few years. And what they've done is they published the report this year and they compared it with 11 countries, or including 11 countries. And that included the UK. And we came out top. We came #1 in 8 out of 11 parameters. We came 3rd in waiting times that everyone makes out, oh, we're so awful at. We came 10th in life expectancy. And as they said, a healthcare system can't actually sort life expectancy. That's poverty. So, well, okay, we need to increase efficiency. That's difficult if you're top in 8 out of 11 parameters and #1 overall in the world. So we must have been appallingly expensive and wasteful. No, we were 2nd cheapest. The only health service in the developed world cheaper than the traditional tax-in, deliver the health system that the UK has had was New Zealand, where you do have to pay to go and see your doctor. We spend less than half per citizen delivering our healthcare to what they spend in the US. And I'm sure all of you have seen enough movies and TV programs in the States to know that actually 40% of American citizens don't have enough healthcare. It's that one of the biggest causes of crime is healthcare and running out of money. So what is the justification for pulling out the pin and throwing a grenade into the English NHS? To me, it's quite simple. It's ideological. It's exactly the same as what we've seen for 30 years. It's moving public resources into private hands. This is a government, one of many governments in 30 years of different colours, who simply believe that the market rules. Everything's for sale, nothing is sacred. And I don't think that's what we believe up here. And that's something we need to know is their direction of travel when we decide, do we just sit in the passenger seat and go with them? Now, those of you who are Labour supporters, of whichever type of Labour, who think, well, I'll vote no, and then I'll vote Labour, and Ed Miliband will come galloping over the hill and save me, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. It was Labour who first brought the 5 private firms into the NHS when they opened independent treatment centres. And it was them that changed the ground rules to any qualified provider. So they actually laid the foundations that the coalition have built these changes on. In Scotland, what we did in '99 when we got hold of our health service is we turned on our heel and we went completely 180 degrees in the opposite direction. We got rid of Mrs. Thatcher's trusts and her internal market, and we went back to being a single, unified, public, cooperative Scottish NHS. And because of that, we've been able to work together all across Scotland on things like the National Patient Safety Initiative and the Quality Improvement Scotland standards for cancers and other illnesses. And I had the opportunity and honour to be involved in writing the ones for breast cancer. What that involves nowadays, and we've been having these since 2001, is every year we all meet. All the breast teams come together, we look at our data, we criticise each other, we share ideas on how to improve. Now, you don't do that if you're business rivals. You don't find M&S and Debenhams meeting up to share ideas on how to get more money out of customers. And that's what's happened down south. Breast Cancer Campaign complain because the NICE guidelines, which came out only in 2009, are not being audited and are not being published. Because, well, if you're in competition, you're not going to stand up and publicly admit that you have a problem. So that's what we've gained since '99. So what they now say, that they kind of find it hard to deny that privatisation is actually happening south of the border, is they say, well, it won't affect us. Don't you worry your prickly little head about it. It's devolved. It's safe. Well, it isn't safe. We don't control the money. We control how we spend it. We get handed our pocket money. So it's like going home, a working woman, you hand in your cash, you get your housekeeping back. That's what we do. And as Michelle pointed out, we hand in more and we get given less back. So our housekeeping is always less than our earnings. Why not just keep the earnings? And there's lots of things we wouldn't spend money on. We wouldn't replace Trident at £100 billion. We wouldn't go around invading anybody else. Having worked in the Middle East, where I worked beside Finns and Dutch and Swiss and Swedish and Norwegian and Irish peacekeepers when I worked in Gaza, there were no British or American because of the political baggage they carried. But there could be Scots. So we could contribute to peace and stability in the world instead of what we did in Iraq that is coming home to roost now. So, what's the threat to us? Well, you'll have heard, like GDP, you hear the word Barnett all the time, which is that our funding is worked out on what they spend. And we get an enhanced amount. We do get a better share than many of the regions in England. We get a 10% share, and our population is only 8.3%. And that was originally worked out because of our geography. We have to provide stuff over miles and miles and miles for relatively small numbers of patients. And we also have to deal with deprivation. But if you looked at these figures that Michelle talked about, we always are paying in. in excess the tax that we would get back. Often in years we pay much more in that we get back, even in that enhanced share. So anything that they do that reduces what England spends on public services through this formula reduces ours. So Scottish budget's already gone down 7.2% since 2010. It's earmarked to drop a total of 16% from 2010 to about 2017. George Osborne already announced his 25 billion austerity cuts that are coming in after the next election. Our share of that will be a couple of billion, at least half of it in welfare, so more suffering for the poor. And all of those things, along with charges, if they come in. Now, I'm not saying they're coming in tomorrow or next year or the year after, but as I say, a lot of people in the business think they're inevitable. If people are paying for health in the way students in England pay for university, that reduces our share of that budget. Now, the Barnett formula also has a huge big target painted on its back. There's lots of politicians down south who want rid of it. And if any of you saw the Herald's front page last Wednesday, you will realise they are backed up by 2/3 of the English population. The headline, Scotland will pay for this referendum. So you need to be aware of that these minuscule little extra powers over setting our rate of income tax will be used exactly to do that. We're taking away, you're going down from a 10% share to an 8.3% share. You want a free NHS, you put your taxes up. So people say your tax will go up if you vote yes. I'm telling you, if you value a free NHS, your taxes will have to go up if you vote no. Now, the other two challenges to us are not just the money and the automatic money. They're a bit more constitutional. And the first one's a wee bit dry. It's a thing called TTIP, which is a free trade agreement that's currently being negotiated between Europe and America. And it's meant to allow lots of trade across the North Atlantic. Lots of pretty uncontrolled trade, I would have to say. And what it involves is negotiating, getting rid of anything that can be defined as a trade barrier. And some of that includes things like additives that you can put in food, or whether you have to declare GM crops in food, or whether you can add hormones to beef, or water to chicken. And I don't think that we can expect that we will win every negotiation. And what it does is it allows big US firms into any aspect that is a market. And NHS England is now a market. Now, other countries in Europe are actually asking for exemption for some of their public services. Now, if you read TTIP, which is a big, dry, long thing that you can find some guidance on, it's not terribly clear that public services even will be exempt. But the weird thing is Westminster hasn't even asked for an exemption for NHS England. And you'd have to say, why not? But if you believe, like I do, that this has been a 30-year journey to meet Mrs. Thatcher's dream, which she declared in the 80s of, we need to move to an insurance-based system like America, then getting that last step as fast as possible, the obvious thing to do is to bring in people who do it in their sleep. Because when they come in, believe me, they'll turn us on our head. They'll have us buying insurance and paying as quick as you like. And again, people are saying, oh yes, Andrew Neil has written to Jeremy Hunt, and Jeremy Hunt will write back eventually and tell us that we'll be fine. But I'm sorry, if we have decided that we are only a region, that wee border on the map won't protect us. They might have tried to exempt us, but if you think enormous multinational American healthcare companies who could buy and sell Scotland before tea time will recognise that, oh, you're not allowed into that region. We agree that you can't go in there. I'm sorry. They are not going to recognise that. And what they can do is they can sue a government. And they could tie the Scottish government up in the investor-state dispute settlement courts for decades and cost us billions, whether we would eventually win or lose. And people need to know about that. Now, I didn't always mention that in my speeches because I think it's a bit of a dry thing. And every time I didn't mention it, someone in the audience asked about it. So that's why you're getting it put in. And to me, it examples one of the amazing things that has happened in Scotland, what Jim Sillars calls the biggest self-education movement that Scotland has ever seen. We're in there, we're on the internet, we're digging, we're listening, we're learning. But to me, the most important one, which is the last one, which is also constitutional, is simply that Westminster are in control of us. Westminster decide how much housekeeping we're going to get. They control the purse strings. And what I said in my little speech that got videoed and went a bit viral and landed me in this mess was not next year or the year after, but picture 10 years from now. They already pay for prescriptions. Their children already don't get free university education. So when their patients are paying to go to a GP or to A&E, do you really, really believe they will send a big bag of money up the M1 to us every year so that we can keep our free prescriptions and our dental checks and our eye checks and our free personal care and our public free NHS? And that's why I thought it was so important that people know this. Now, the NHS is there to catch you when you fall. And there is no insurance policy in the world, no matter how well off you are, that would give you the kind of cover, as in, regardless, you're sick, we'll do our best for you. But it can't give you health. Health comes from having a good start in life. And what do we see in parts of Scotland, particularly the West, where I've spent most of my life? What we see is poverty and deprivation, and we see it growing. We see the numbers increasing. And we know that it blights health. We know that it blights education. So we have poor outcomes for those young people when they come out of school. They have poor life chances, and they often make poor life choices. And then they die, because they don't live as long as people elsewhere. Now we think, or we can think, as the coalition thinks, these people are just wasters. They're vandals. We're not giving them anything more. We're taking everything away. But you are paying for them. It's inevitable. You pay benefits. You pay the police. You pay prison if you put them in it. You pay addiction services. Why not take all of that money and invest it in the child at the beginning of their life with decent early years projects and childcare, so that children who maybe are in a family that's struggling and nobody's reading to them and nobody's singing them songs and no one's teaching them how to finger paint, that they might actually get the chances. Because at the moment when these children reach primary one, they say the gap is already too big. So again, as Michelle talked about, sharing is more effective. If the money is at the bottom of the economy, it's going round and round and round. It's not sitting offshore. Well, so it is if we put our money into the early parts of our children's lives, we can change the future. Now, I agree with David Cameron, and you're not going to hear me say that very often. I agree with him almost completely in a statement that he made. He named 2 of the 3 greatest things that Britain ever did. It was the welfare state and the NHS. And we did both of them within a few years of coming out of the Second World War. So when they say, oh, you'll not manage to build a better Scotland, they did pretty well after what they went through. Now, he put the BBC as third. And I'm sorry, I wouldn't put the BBC as third. I would put free education as third. And I think when they talk about us leaving the family, us leaving the values of Britain, it isn't us leaving. England, through no choice of most of their people, are leaving. The welfare state is being destroyed. There's no talk of social security anymore. The health service is being broken up, privatised and flogged off to private companies. And free education in England is long gone. So if these are things that are really, really important to Scotland, we need to take control, because that's the only way we can protect our values. And I believe that if we can show that we can have a sustainable economy and yet look after each other, the progressive voices in England will actually stand up again, because they'll be able to say there is another way. It isn't just the market rules. So we can do it for ourselves, and we can actually do it for our friends and our family and our brothers and sisters south of the border. And when we go into that booth and we vote yes, you need to be prepared for 10 years of hard work. Because we have to get up off our backsides. We need to roll up our sleeves, stop whinging, won't be able to blame anybody else, take control and take responsibility. It'll be the absolute making of us. And what we will get in return is we'll be able to make a Scotland that we are proud to leave to our children and their children. Thank you.
Hear, hear.